Our today's video is about two completely different writers, namely Ivan Bahrianyi and Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. We'll also touch on their completely different positions on Ukraine. Let's get started with Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn, who was born on December 11, 1918, in Kislovodsk, Stavropol Krai. The writer's mother was Ukrainian, whose name was Taisia Zakharovna Sherbak, and she came from a wealthy Kuban Cossack family. The author's father, Aleksandr Semenovich Solzhenitsyn, was an officer in the Muscovite Tsarist army. His death occurred as a result of a hunting accident before Alexander was born. Interestingly, though Solzhenitsyn's mother was Ukrainian and he heard a lot of Ukrainian in his childhood, he hated Ukraine. He did so both concealedly and openly. In his literary works, he criticized the Gulag prisoners, the Banderites, who refused to make close contact with the Russian prisoners. However, this pointed to the fact that even then intelligent Ukrainians understood what friendship with Muscovites, even so-called oppositionists, was and how it commonly ended. But that's a different story, so now we're going to return to Solzhenitsyn's life. In 1924, with his mother, he relocated to Rostov-on-Don. He went to school there. During high school, he became obsessed with literature, writing poetry and essays. After graduating from high school in 1936, he became a member of the Komsomol. In that same year, 1936, he started studying at Rostov University, at the Department of Physics and Mathematics. Not only that, in 1938 he also attempted to pass the entrance exams to Yuri Zavadsky's theater school, but failed. In 1941, he graduated from Rostov University. At the same time, he studied at the Moscow Institute of Philosophy, Literature and History, and also graduated in 1941, however, according to some sources, he was unable to graduate because of the war. After 1 year of studying at the college, in 1942, Lieutenant Solzhenitsyn was appointed commander of a sound reconnaissance battery. He served on the Belarusian front and was promoted to the rank of captain. He was awarded 2 Soviet orders as a participant in the Battle of Orel. But February 1945 brought a dramatic change in the situation. Solzhenitsyn was arrested by the frontline counterintelligence for anti-Soviet expressions. Solzhenitsyn served his sentence in New Jerusalem camp near Moscow, worked at a brick factory and at a construction site in Moscow, at the Kaluga outpost. Another twist was made in his life story. Later, when the main directorate of the OGPU camps, Gulag, decided to use prisoners in their specialty, he was relocated to a secret research institute. In 1950, Solzhenitsyn was transferred to common tasks in the Ekibastuz special camp in Kazakhstan. That wasn't the end of the twists in the anti-Ukrainianist's life. In 1952, Solzhenitsyn was diagnosed with a cancerous tumor. According to the media, it was a miracle that he survived. A camp surgeon, one of the prisoners himself, operated on him under local anesthesia. You must admit that he was very lucky, however, knowing that he denied the Holodomor. Well, we'll keep silent here, you know why. More on that later. In 1954, he successfully finished a course of treatment in a Tashkent hospital and was finally cured of cancer. In 1956, Solzhenitsyn was rehabilitated, so he began working as a teacher in a rural school near Ryazan, or in the Vladimir region, as other sources say, where he lived with a woman who later became the prototype for the heroine of his story, Matryona's Place, and then moved to Ryazan. His previous arrest wasn't the last one, though. In 1965 the KGB seized the writer's archive, and in 1966 he was completely banned from publication. And again, in 1970, there were swings in his life, not the last, namely, in 1970 Solzhenitsyn was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature for ethical strength. Wait, what, for ethical strength? As Ukrainians, we have some doubts. In 1971, a series of publications wrote that the KGB had poisoned the writer and that he fell seriously ill but survived. In 1974, Solzhenitsyn was arrested, accused in treason, deprived of his Soviet citizenship by the decision of the CCCPSU and deported to West Germany. Later he lived in Zurich. Then in 1976 he moved to the United States, to Vermont. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, in 1997, Solzhenitsyn became an academician of the Russian Academy of Sciences, and in 1998 he received the Academy's highest award, the Lomonosov Gold Medal. Yet, in the same year, Solzhenitsyn refused the Order of St. Andrew I called, which he was awarded by Yeltsin. And now it's time to talk about Solzhenitsyn's opinion of Ukraine. Thus, in his last years, Solzhenitsyn had clearly anti-Ukrainian views and believed that Ukrainians, unlike Muscovites, had no right to create an independent state. He was against the collapse of the USSR on ethnic grounds and was against Ukraine's independence. In 2008, in his very last year of life, Solzhenitsyn denied that the Holodomor was a genocide of the Soviets against the Ukrainian people in 1931 to 1933. No wonder Solzhenitsyn is considered Putin's spiritual teacher. In his early works, specifically in his novel, The Gulag Archipelago, Volume 3, Part 5, Chapter 2, Solzhenitsyn wrote that Moscovia itself should allow Ukraine to secede, so that in the future there would be a possibility of a so-called reunification, but in fact an occupation. He also believed that only certain regions of Ukraine, where only Ukrainians live, have the right to secede from Russia and join an independent Ukraine, because, to his mind, in some Ukrainian regions the population self-identifies as Ukrainians, in some as Russians, and in some as no one at all. Among other things, he was against the recognition of Crimea, the south and some territories of the left bank of Ukraine as Ukrainian. And here are Putin's tones, in all their glory. Here is what he wrote about this: brothers. There is no need for this brutal division. It is a blight on the communist years. We suffered through the Soviet era together, we ended up in this pit together, and we will get out together, argued Solzhenitsyn, recalling the fictional, common descent from Kievan Rus, and intermarriage, and regions where, as though, there was never any old Ukraine, like the wild field of nomads, Novorossiya, or Crimea, Donbass. But there is another point of view. Some researchers, such as Vadim Skurativsky, believe that the accusations of Solzhenitsyn's Ukraine-phobia are overblown, as he was the first to risk creating a touching image of a Ukrainian peasant Banderite in censored literature, and always highlighted his half-Ukrainian origin. But that was earlier, and as we can see, later he changed it to the opposite. The imperial views have won. He died at the age of 90 in Moscow on August 3, 2008. Right when Putin began to show his true face to the world. In the words of Solzhenitsyn's son, Nat, the writer died of acute heart failure. So, now it's time to talk about a completely different person, Ivan Bahrianyi. The writer, poet, novelist, and political activist's real name was Ivan Pavlovich Lozoviahin. He was born on October 2, 1906, in the city of Okhturka in the Kharkiv Governorate. This city is known to every modern Ukrainian. Bahrianyi was not his only pseudonym, also he wrote under such pen names as Ivan Polyarny, 40 Magpies, and Don Kocherga. Bahrianyi was a teacher of drawing in his early years and was highly active, like holding a number of positions in various organizations and working in the mines of Donbass. He wrote poetry and traveled around Ukraine. For a while, he studied at the Kiev Art Institute, but didn't have a chance to graduate because of financial difficulties and political unreliability. He was a member of the Opposition Literature Association workshop of the Revolutionary Word. His writings were mercilessly criticized due to their fundamental Ukrainian position. His poem Ave Maria was censored, and his historical novel in verse Skelka was accused of conducting counter-revolutionary agitation. It might have seemed that both Solzhenitsyn and Bahrianyi were arrested and censored, but even at this stage of Bahrianyi's biography, it's clear that they are two different people by nature of their souls. Besides, Ivan Bahrianyi's protest moods had been maturing since his teenage years. He witnessed how in 1920 the Bolsheviks tortured his uncle, who was a soldier of the Ukrainian People's Republic, and his uncle's father, a disabled beekeeper. Another uncle died on Solovki. When he began his literature career at the age of 19, Ivan left the Komsomol, and each next milestone in his life moved him further and further away from the Soviet regime, until an unbridgeable gap lay between them. So, moving on to Bahrianyi's first arrest, and it was on April 16, 1932. He spent 11 months in solitary confinement in the GPU's internal prison, and was sentenced to 3 years of exile in the Far East, from where he tried to escape but was caught. For his escape attempt, he received a new sentence, another 3 years. This wasn't his last arrest. For the second time, on June 16, 1938, he was arrested for participation in a nationalist counter-revolutionary organization. It seems that the number 16 wasn't a lucky one for him. But he didn't sign the guilty verdict, and spent 2 years in prison, including 83 days on death row. In 1940, though, due to lack of evidence, he was released. All of his experiences were described in his autobiographical novel, The Garden of Gethsemane, a work that was 2 decades ahead of the famous Gulag Archipelago by Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. Let's just say that Bahrianyi's work is a much stronger prison novel in terms of content than Solzhenitsyn's. Everything can be explained very simply. No matter how bad Solzhenitsyn was for the Soviets, he was a Muscovite, which means that he was and is still being promoted by Muscovites. Thus, the whole world heard about Solzhenitsyn. There have always been attempts to destroy Ukrainian writers, both physically and morally. Imprisonment, executions, torture. Everything was done as if Ukrainian writers had never existed. Now back to Bahrianyi's life. During World War II, Bahrianyi moved to Galicia and became part of the Ukrainian underground. He served as a propaganda officer, participated in the creation of the Ukrainian Supreme Liberation Council, and developed program documents. During this time, he wrote the novels The Hunters and the Hunted, Luba, and the poem Yuliapol. In 1945, he emigrated to Germany. His pamphlet, Why I Am Not Going Back to the Soviet Union, became widely read and became one of the articles that changed the attitude in the West to the problem of displaced people. He was the editor of the Ukrainian News newspaper, founded the Ukrainian Revolutionary Democratic Party, was the chairman of the executive body of the Ukrainian National Council and deputy president of the UPR. He was in favor of consolidating the Ukrainian patriotic movement. Ivan Bahrianyi died on August 25, 1963 in New-Ulm, which is in Germany. Not long before, he was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Literature. The biographies are quite similar, but they were completely different people. One of them was a common Muscovite who supported the Russians' desire to merely capture Ukraine, while at the same time hating the Soviet Union, and the other one fought for Ukraine and its values. What we have to do is to make sure that Ukraine never has anything to do with Moscovia again. And to do this, we need to continuously help Ukraine's defense forces. And don't forget our history and our heroes. To support our project, you can like, share, and leave a comment. You can also support the project financially. The details are in the description box below.